I fell in love with listening, that it's truly like a hidden superpower, recognizing the power of listening in all of this. Then there's no way that you can't fall in love with it.
Hi, this is Andy. I'd like you to think of two people, right? So the first one is someone in your personal life, maybe a relative or friend, or at least someone who used to be a friend. Can you think of someone that you just don't look forward to seeing anymore? I mean, maybe you like dread the thought of having to be around them. Maybe it's because of their outspoken political or social views or how they navigate issues around COVID, maybe you see a social media post from them and once again, it just makes your blood boil. Anyone come to mind? And then the second person I'd like you to think of is someone in your work life. I mean, there's a divide between you and them as well. And it could be for similar reasons. The way they rail about a social cause you think differently about, or it could be differences in how things should be done at work. Like, for example, maybe every problem is solved with agile. And you just think they're oversimplifying things. And the truth is, it's creating a divide. So don't let this be a passive exercise. Think of examples of where there are divides in your life, because we're having an important discussion on that today about how to bridge differences in dangerously divided times. We're joined by Juliana Tafur, who's the inaugural director of the Bridging Differences program at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. She's led groundbreaking work strengthening connections across the many areas that divide us these days. But instead of just observing or reporting about the problems, Juliana and her team are actively developing and delivering practical, bridge building resources that are helping real people inspire meaningful change. If you feel the problems of polarization in culture and in the workplace are just too daunting to do anything about, Juliana's here to spark some hope for us today, and I can't wait to share the discussion with you. Hey, quick note, I want to invite you to join our Lead 52 family. It's a global group of leaders who are committed to transforming our ability to lead and deliver. It's 52 weeks of leadership learning delivered right to your inbox, taking less than 5 minutes a week, and it's all for free. Learn more and sign up at getlead52.com. Thanks. Let's jump into today's discussion with Juliana about bridging differences in divided times. Juliana, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you, Andy. It's good to be here with you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. You grew up in Colombia, moved to the U.S. around age 15, if I understand right. Can you think of anything from your family culture or early experiences growing up that might have influenced you to become a leading voice in bridging divides?
Yes. That is the million-dollar question, for sure. Growing up in a very divided country in very difficult times certainly prompted me to want to explore what a peaceful society would look like and be like. And I moved to the US at 15, and I thought that all the division was left behind. And I would not need to think deeply about that question in the context of the United States. And a year later, September 11th happened, and I realized that the need that I'd felt throughout the first 15 years of life in Colombia was also very much a reality in the context of my new country. And that actually led me to begin to explore further and understand Middle Eastern culture. So my double major, I went to Northwestern soon after that in 2003 and majored in journalism and history with a focus on the Middle East and Africa, and spent some time during my college years in Egypt also as a result of that, because it seemed like in the US context, that was the issue that I needed to grapple with and understand without really knowing that all paths would lead to Rome years later, right? And that
Right.
this need to understand the current and most pressing divides would flourish into a need to try to understand how to bridge them.
That's interesting. I didn't know that part of your backstory.
Mhm.
You talk about how we so easily other people, right? Using that terminology. And it's easy to see the polarization, certainly in the political realm. But there's us versus thems in organizations as well, right? I mean, there's engineering versus sales, the old guard versus Gen Z. A woman in the Air Force told me there's the pilots versus the non-pilots and higher ed, right? There's the PhDs and those who aren't. Why does it seem that we so easily fall into the trap of othering people?
Well, I think as a species, we were made to think in tribes. We were made to be a part of our own groups for self protection. And that was okay when we were living in kind of small communities where that was needed. But we've taken that mentality and we apply it to our current day societies, and it just does not work. We need to think of each other as interdependent, and unfortunately, our brains will always go to labeling. That is just how our brains function. And science also tells us that whenever something seems foreign or someone seems like an outsider, like that would trigger our amygdala, right? And our kind of threat response. So we continue to do that. But we can bypass that initial reaction that we have to other by equipping ourselves with tools that allow us to, one, understand that we are safe, two, tell our bodies that we are safe, and push ourselves to get to know others, understand others better, so that less and less our amygdala isn't reacting in this way. So that's why we talk about the 14 science-based skills for bridging differences that we have in the Bridging Differences Playbook as tools to allow us to bypass our initial impulses and strive to be better.
Yeah, because it seems naturally we just do it anyway, right? So um, I hinted in the opening that most of us know of or directly experienced disconnection in recent years. I mean, like I said in the opening, could have been COVID policy, could be politics, could be social issues, and that's led to family members. Like most of us know somebody who has a family member. They don't talk to each other or friendships who have ended. And it definitely spills over into work. You said an interesting thing in your TED talk, Juliana, that disconnection is one of the evils of our time. Would you elaborate on that?
Yeah, like you said, we all feel it. And we may feel it for different reasons, like
Mhm.
you also said.
Yeah.
And it may be affecting us in different ways, which is why it seems more urgent and pressing to some than others. Some are more comfortable in that space of
Mhm.
division and disconnection, and some aren't. So it's very personal. It is one of the evils of our time because we have forgotten the path to each other. We have gotten so used to the divisive rhetoric that we think that's normal. And deep down, we know it's not. But I think, social media algorithms and echo chambers where these extreme views on both ends are shared and normalized has really hardened us.
Yeah.
And it's troubling.
I think of the fact that the disconnection happens, we fall into what you're talking about, the even a greater echo chamber because we don't when we disconnect, we don't we kind of forget that reasonable people think otherwise, right? And so I think it's evil because it's just so insidious. It just reinforces the problem and it just compounds. It feels like, and so
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
even
Mhm.
exaggerates some of the other stuff. So
Yep. Mhm.
yeah, I think everyone listening to us, we recognize the problem, and your mission is to help us get these deeper connections. And a lot of it starts with, what you call listening courageously or deep listening. Right. So, how's that type of listening different when you're talking about it from what we might often see think about when we talk about listening?
Yeah. Yeah. So we talk about it. I've used listen courageously in the past, which I
Mhm,
still love because the act of listening does require courage. So I want to call
mhm,
that out.
mhm,
At the Greater Good Science Center, we pair it with compassion, which is equally important. So we talk about the act of
mhm,
wanting to listen as an act of compassion. So what we know is that truly, if you want other people to understand us, we need to start listening to them more. And what science shows us, which is quite marvelous, is that just by us listening, we are perceived as more trustworthy. And it also encourages our conversation partners to be more open minded, to be less defensive, and to be even less focused on their self interests. So, if you think of the impact of just listening, it's quite, I would say, astounding, right? Like, I fell in love with listening through a film that brought Americans together on opposite ends of the spectrum and understood the power of listening in those interactions to allow the other person to be seen and heard, and the power that that had. But then when you dig further into the research and you understand that it's truly like a hidden superpower, then there's no way that you can't fall in love with it and try to practice it, right? But what does it entail? I'll just very briefly outline it, because you can get better at doing this. This is like a muscle that you exercise, right? And as you do it more, you become better at it. So when we listen with compassion, I mentioned courage, the courage that's required to want to enter into that conversation, the curiosity that's required to be there and ask questions, the empathy that you display while you do it, as well as the humility to actually sit with someone else's story.
Yeah.
So I'll break that down further. For example, when we invite people to listen with compassion, we invite them to ask questions to encourage the other person to elaborate on their thoughts or feelings. So this may look like, I find this topic really intriguing. Can you share more? Or can you please share or tell me what led you to this viewpoint? That is curiosity right there, right? So having kind of the willingness to want to learn about the other person's experience and asking questions that really prompt that.
Yeah.
And then we talk about empathy, right? And the empathy required when you're listening to someone and maybe they're saying something that's hard for you to agree with or understand. Instead of thinking about you and how you feel, you think about their situation. You think about them. So, why does this person feel or think the way that they do? And that is empathy in action. So, the intentional reflection and active engagement and the ability to understand with their thoughts or connect with their thoughts, their emotions, and their experiences in a way that validates their perspective. And you may still disagree, but you're validating what they're saying in a way that still feels right and truthful to you, where you're honoring your stance and your difference, but what that does to the other person when you do that. And then it also requires humility, because you're recognizing that your perspective may not be the only one, right? You may think it's the only valid one, but it's not
Right.
the
Of
only
course.
one, right? Like, what does it give you when you actually enter a conversation with that humility that anyone can teach you something? That the person in front of you has a lived experience that is different, and they can teach you something about why they see the world like that. So you could say things like, yes, I hear you, or I can see why you would feel that way, while still disagreeing. Again, you can affirm their feelings, you can affirm their intentions, you can affirm their lived experiences while still disagreeing.
Oh, okay, it's good. I love it because I'm thinking of a quote I heard years ago, Juliana. It was something like "Curiosity is the ultimate hack," and I think that's true here, right? That, like the of truly being curious, and you know, I don't know which is the most difficult of truly being curious, because I think sometimes that's hard. Um, Withholding ego, withholding judgment. I think I think sometimes we think if I show empathy, I show agreement, which is a key difference, right? I'm trying to show that I'm curious to understand, and how'd you come to that? But that doesn't mean we necessarily have to agree. But just the process, right? I think that's where you build bridges, is the process of trying to understand. Do I have that right?
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned withholding ego and withholding judgment and dropping any desire to be right.
Yeah.
Just so hard for us to do
Yeah.
in our culture and in our society,
Mm.
right? We're
Yeah.
taught to, be debaters and know exactly what we're going to say and come out on top and win arguments and conversations. And so the value of humility and openness and or values of humility, openness, curiosity, empathy are not really front and centered in our society, which is so sad. Yeah, I just want to say, what are we teaching our kids when it's
Yeah.
all about winning and
Mm.
speaking and knowing where you stand and not teaching them this openness and fluidity and understanding that ultimately, I mean, connection with others is the way to succeed in life.
That's why we're having this on a leadership podcast, because it's just so important for us as leaders to learn how to do this so we can model it for, just like you said, whether it's at home or at work. And I don't know. A question I learned years ago from the old Crucial Conversations curriculum was, ask yourself, like, why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do what they just did, or believe what they believe, or say what they said there? And it's a version of what you have been talking about. It's a version of perspective taking,
Mm,
right? And I would guess that the more we truly do what you are helping us do, the more we realize there's nuance to someone's position. There's nuance to their lived experience and things like that. So I don't know. I don't know if this is a fair question, but can you think of an example where, or how you've seen someone, either how you've done this yourself, or how you've seen someone use perspective taking, this empathy thing we were talking about, to actually create connection? Yeah, I'm looking for a story to show this is possible. It's not just theory.
yeah, for sure. This is how I came to this work. So for me, it started after the 2016 US election
Mhm.
and an environment, very similar to the one we're in,
All right.
where I was deeply troubled by the division, disconnection, hatred that just became so apparent. And I wanted to do something about it. And the way that I knew how could at the time was to bring three sets of participants together across the topics of abortion, guns, and immigration. And
Easy things like
yeah, just
that.
easy conversation.
Right.
And it was my deep hope that they would connect on a human level despite their differences, but I had absolutely no guarantees that that would happen. And it was, people who very fervently believed what they believed. And I wanted to understand also some of those people that I was having a hard time understanding. And I walked away from the experience, like I mentioned, one, recognizing the power of listening in all of this, and two, recognizing that this was indeed possible, that people could disagree on issues as complex as, abortion and still believe what they believe, but walk away understanding that the other person and the other camp by default wasn't evil. And how much that one lifted a weight off their shoulders, and two allowed them to move towards more civil, productive conversations where perhaps there can be progress on issues. And it shifted my entire life trajectory, right? From that point forward, I could only spend time understanding what made this possible, digging into the research, and working to create other spaces where that was possible for folks in different sectors of society. And that's my work at the Greater Good Science Center.
Yeah.
But I do hold with me that story, especially of the pro-life, pro-choice,
Mhm.
and also the kind of gun reform for gun conversation was extremely moving. But the two ladies who were part of the pro-life, pro-choice conversation were a part of a series of workshops that I ran across the country for a number of years. And what struck me the most when they came and shared was that they both went into the conversations doing exactly what we were just talking about, wanting to be right and wanting to win. And they walked away understanding that what was wrong was how they were perceiving the other person, and that what needed to change was their openness and ability to engage and to see each other's humanity.
In the TED Talk, you have a still picture of the two of them hugging each other, right?
Mhm.
And I think culturally we think of people choking each other, like when they're on opposite sides of such, you know, topics like that. So
Mm,
if I'm just thinking of the listener to us right now, let's say there's someone who they're just not looking forward to seeing somebody at maybe it's a social gathering or somebody on the other side of the business. It just drives them crazy. I think it's probably fair to say as humans, we can't not make assumptions about them. Right? I mean, it's maybe just natural that we do some sorting or we do some stories we tell ourselves about them. At least naturally, we'll do that. So, could you give us just a little bit of coaching? I know it's hypothetical, but just a couple things that you might coach us. If you could be whispering to us of a few things we could do to try to seek more connection instead of drifting into quiet disconnection.
yeah. So there are several. You've mentioned perspective taking. We've talked
Yeah.
about listening. I really like talking about and thinking about shared identities.
Mm.
So, even across our differences, what are those shared identities that we can gather around, that we can connect over, so that then we can kind of start a process where we can work through our differences? So, I'll start with a study and then we'll go into some kind of
Great.
practicalities. But
Mhm.
there's a study from the UK that we often cite and like a lot, which focuses on fans of Manchester United soccer team. And what they did is they brought soccer fans together and they talked a lot about the team itself, the wins of the team, their favoritism through that team. And then those folks were sent through a parking lot. There was a person in need in the parking lot. And in some cases, the person was wearing a Manchester United jersey. In other cases, the person was wearing a Liverpool jersey, the rival team's jersey. And when they were in this mindset of our team, the research showed that they were 4 times less likely to help the person in need if
Wow.
the person was representing the rival team,
If they
Liverpool.
were primed to think team first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they brought the same or a different set of folks, but Manchester United fans together. And they were primed to think of soccer fandom in general,
Hmm.
their connection with other soccer fans, the love for soccer. And they did the same thing, sent the folks across a parking lot and person in need, different shirts. And in this case, they were just as likely to help the person wearing the rival team's jersey as they were helping the person with the jersey of the
Yeah.
Manchester United team.
Yeah.
Just as likely.
Yeah.
So it's it goes to show, right, what happens in our brains when we are prompted to think in group versus out group and who belongs and who doesn't, and how that increases our kindness, support, and help towards others. So, shared identities is a powerful tool for understanding that one, there are things we share that can bypass this in group mentality. And that can be simple. We're part of the same PTO. We go to the same neighborhood association. We are a part of a team with goals that we share. And it just allows us to find that connection point and to work forward from there, as I shared at the very beginning. And sometimes that's what we need to get through some of the toughest divides. And that ties into finding shared goals, which is another really important one for us to kind of keep in mind through the times that we're living in, right? When we understand, like I said, we're part of the same team and we have this goal that matters more than our differences. Can we connect over why that matters? How working together is going to help us achieve it? Why it's necessary that we put our differences aside for the benefit of this joint project. So that's another one that, in times like these where, maybe we're having a really hard time sitting down and listening, or maybe we feel like we don't have to and we're trying to self-preserve right now, that's okay too, right? But do you still want to move forward on things that you need to collaborate on?
Something I feel like I'm trying to work on. I'm curious what you think about this. Is having a growing distaste for labels. Yeah. So, like, if
Mhm.
I hear somebody go, "Oh, they're just a liberal," or "They're just a conservative," or "They're just a whatever," yeah,
Mhm.
because I know you talk about dropping labels. I seem to recall that's been part of your vocabulary in the past, and I think it's hard to not sort. I think it's hard not to just do some of that. But whenever a label comes up, I'm trying to be like little spidey sense of maybe we're missing some nuance here. And I don't know, my take on this is the more you listen for labels, the more you hear them everywhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
So,
begin to sort your entire reality around them.
yeah.
And what's complex about that is that no one is a single label.
Right.
No one. We
Right.
are so complex. We are so multi-dimensional. And we are doing ourselves and others a huge disfavor when we put people in buckets and in categories that mean absolutely nothing. I mean, and I know it's hard for some to understand this, but it is a social construct. It is not real.
Right.
So,
It's
I
not
mean,
real.
I think the easiest way to go about this for folks who are so embedded in labels is to think about the times when they themselves have been labeled. And then it starts from there. It starts from that awareness that maybe that didn't feel right to them. So, what can they do themselves to begin to see others in a different way so that they are not put in a box either? Because I understand that, people who may have a hard time seeing this are also being put in boxes.
Right.
And the way to start to get out of those boxes is by practicing themselves the act of getting others out of boxes.
I mean, you've been in boxes, right? You talked about how your dad was viewed differently because of his English wasn't as good as yours when he came in. Um, you're from Berkeley. Right, right. I mean, there's all kinds of boxes I'm sure you can be put into, and so I don't know. I just think it'd be a good challenge for everyone listening. Just even if we just start there, of this person we're dreading, what kind of boxes have we put them in, right? What kind of labels have we been using? And there's
Mhm.
probably opportunity to get a more nuanced view of it. And
Mhm.
I,
Mhm. Mhm.
I you still have the 7-day campaign for Connection Challenge going, don't you?
We do.
Would you tell people about that as well as other resources on the Greater Good website? Because I'd love for people to have more learning after they listen to this.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes. So, leading up to the election campaign in 24, we decided that we wanted to provide additional support for folks and created a 7-day campaign for connection challenge where we were inviting folks to practice 7 skills, 1 skill a day, some of which we've talked about today.
Mhm, mhm.
And since that, the campaign has become more of an evergreen resource. So it's not pegged to the
Right.
elections,
Yeah.
but it still allows folks to sign up, get an email a day where they are being invited to do things like not categorize people or put them in boxes, an invitation to expand their views in circles. So, how is it that they can do that? Either through friendships, which is a bigger ask, or through just like reading a narrative from a different community, someone who you don't understand, or visiting a neighborhood that's different from yours. We've talked about finding shared identities and the power of connecting across something that we have in common with others. Perspective taking, so the ability to really understand the experiences that shape the views of those that we don't understand or agree with, which involves listening with compassion. Trying self distancing is an important tool and skill that we have not talked about, but it's especially relevant in these times with all the news and all that is maybe triggering. Just having the skill and the ability to distance yourself from yourself and think of yourself as an outsider. And instead of using first person pronouns, you would use third person pronouns like Jane is so angry instead of I'm so angry. Or in my case, Juliana is so angry instead of I'm so angry. And that allows me a minute to like see myself from this outsider's perspective and gather my thoughts and hopefully reclaim my composure. And identifying common goals, which we've talked about, which is just so important because we don't want people to think that this invitation to bridge differences is an invitation to dialogue, right? Only dialogue for the sake of dialoguing. We want people to truly understand that this is the way forward to collaboration and deeper understanding in our communities to move issues forward.
You briefly mentioned, or actually, I think you've referred to a couple times, the Bridging Differences Playbook, which is a free PDF that people can download. I think it's super practical. It's a beautiful piece too. I mean, I think it's very well done. Anything else on the website that you think people might find interesting?
Yeah, so we have an edX course that is free to the public as well, that is also inspired by some of these science based skills for bridging differences. Anyone can take that online and pay a small fee for a certificate if they want that.
Yeah.
And I think just an invitation for people to know that this is possible, that when we have the right tools, and I've mentioned a few in this podcast today, and they are available as part of our Campaign for Connection 7-Day Challenge, we can approach these conversations from a place of, I know this is possible. I have the comfort and ability to do this through these skills, and this is the outcome. And when we begin to see the positive outcome, then we want to do it more and we become better at it. So just know that it's a path. It requires first the openness and the willingness to do it. But once you get there, the skills are there for you so that you can engage and in the process feel better. Like we know that when people do engage, they are part of an exhausted body that is eager to do something about the polarization and the hatred in our society and doesn't know where to start. So 75% of Americans are with you, and that number is rising.
That's cool. Yeah. And like you said, it not only helps our own well-being, which is important, but it also helps our teams work better. It helps. I mean, there's so many virtuous benefits to doing what we're talking about today. There's so much more we could talk about, Juliana, but could I end with this? We have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast. Can you think of some ways? I think you mentioned before we started recording, you're a parent.
Yeah.
Anything you try to do to encourage bridge building abilities in your kids?
Yeah. Every day.
Right.
Yes. I think it's very easy for kids. I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old to see us in relationship with others, some who are different from us and who we might not agree with, and be quick to jump into categorizations. Oh, this person is X, fill in the blank. And it can be hard for us as parents to take a stance and say, I know we don't agree with that person. I know what this person is doing might even be so harmful to you and feel like this person needs to be X, but they're not. There is more to them that we just don't understand. And those are teaching moments. And it's hard because sometimes we might feel like the person is also X.
Right.
But hopefully we are giving them opportunities to think of people as multidimensional, even when it seems really difficult. And I'll end with like a little story that actually explains this in a way that is more concrete. We used to have a neighbor who killed squirrels, and the squirrels fell in our backyard. And it was really intense and traumatizing for the kids to see dead squirrels falling in our yard. So they were quick to put a label on this person. And we were all affected by this. I felt like their safety was also at stake and that of our pets who were often in the yard. And so it created a lot of tension in the family. And even when they said he is X, I had a hard stance of no, he's not. Let's stay away from that label. I understand this is bothersome. We want it to end, but let's try to understand why is it that he does that, which in the end we couldn't. So that's a separate story. There was no willingness or openness to really dialogue.
Yeah.
And that's also important, right? Like, I also want to end with that note.
Yeah.
It is not with everyone that you want to bridge differences with, that you will bridge differences with, and that's okay, right? You can have all the tools in the playbook and still not get through to someone who you want to bridge differences with, but at least you tried.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I will say is, as long as someone's opposing belief is not denying your existence, and if respect is present, you can engage in these deeper bridge building conversations. If not, you take care of yourself first and foremost. So just some like nuances and complexities for these complex times.
Yeah, I won't say it haunts me as a father, but I think of it often of how am I modeling this?
Mhm.
like I can I can tell the kids, you need to be open minded, don't use labels. But if I, they see it if I'm falling into it. So none of us are trying to be perfect parents, right? And all of us are human and things like that. But I don't remember where I read it from you, but it was something along the lines of it only takes one to start it anyway. It
Mhm.
takes others to sustain it, like you said. But
Mhm.
but why not us be leaders to start these sort of conversations? For those listening, I hope you found this discussion to be as inspiring as I have. If you'd like to learn more about Juliana and her work, I put links to the Bridging Differences program website in the show notes for this cast. So, Juliana, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you, Andy. It's been a pleasure.